It's the World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us from the mothership in New York City, Noor Ibrahim, international news editor of the Daily Beast. How are you?
I'm good. It's a warmer day here in New York, relatively.
Okay, well, we'll try to catch up then. Borzu Daragahi, international correspondent for The Independent, is with us. How are you, sir?
Always a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure as well. Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for Portuguese news magazine Visão.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
All right. Eric Randolph is now culture editor at the French news agency AFP. How are things, sir?
Very good. Nice to be here.
Nice to welcome you. You can, by the way, listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. It is now 5 days on from Turkey's deadliest earthquakes since 1939. And through the grief and despair, rescuers, well, they persist. In Gaziantep, the first tremor struck Monday at 4:17 a.m., a time when citizens were home and asleep. 94 hours later, a rare reason to cheer with the rescue of this 17-year-old.
I just waited for you all to arrive by myself. Thank God you arrived. Thank you, everyone.
And more have been rescued since. Borzu Daragahi, as one of our correspondents was saying earlier, we've gone from reporting on the dead to now reporting on those saved.
I think that those incidents of people being saved are going to be fewer and fewer as the hours go on. The death toll is extraordinary. It's already exceeded the devastating Izmit earthquake of 1999, and that is just counting Turkey. It's not counting the dead in Syria that remain to be counted, and that the tragedy there is like compounded by the war that has taken place over the last dozen years. This is just an awful situation, and it will not get much better in the coming days.
It won't get much better. That 1999 quake in Izmit sparked fury at the time and calls to enforce building codes. At the time, it was the newer buildings that collapsed. These two quakes were so huge that they spared neither new nor ancient edifices like parts of a 3rd century Roman and Byzantine era castle in this image. Eric Randolph, you're a former Turkey correspondent. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think if you spend any time living in Turkey, you have earthquakes constantly living in the back of your mind. Istanbul, it sits on a particularly fierce fault line, and we are constantly aware that at any moment something devastating like this can happen. And although it's particularly tragic that it happens in an area that is already facing so many problems down in southern Turkey and northern Syria, Istanbul is really no better prepared for something like
no better prepared? What, they don't have, like in Japan, civil defense drills and the such?
Not that I saw in my time there. I mean, there's been a lot of building codes put in, especially after 1999, because that earthquake did tremor right up towards Istanbul. But where it's supposed to hit in the Sea of Marmara would, one estimate that was bandied about was that up to 600,000 people could die, between 140 and 600,000. It's and largely because a lot of those building codes are simply ignored.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main issue. You have a lot of promises, a lot of rules, an insurance pool that has been created. All homeowners are supposed to pay into it. But, you have to enforce these rules. And Turkey, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is in the hands of the developers and the construction magnates, who are the pillars of his support and the support of his Justice and Development Party. These are very powerful people. Yes, they may commit to buildings that are up to code. They might be reinforced with steel, and that's enough to handle a slight tremor, but they're not designed with the engineering specifics that would handle a large earthquake like this, and that would require the buildings to bend when there is something of a scale like this, 7.5, and not simply pancake, as has been happening to hundreds, if not thousands, of towers across southern Turkey.
Ana Navarro Pedro.
Yes, we've seen that many buildings just fell down from the bottom, from the ground floor, which means that there was no structure sustaining. Portugal is a country that is on a tectonic plate,
yeah.
And we know that this can happen to us as well. And the problem is in Turkey as well that there is such pressure to give a roof to a growing population that apparently many times the licenses are given after the buildings have been built, not according to norms and rules, but they are given, maybe some corruption, maybe not, just for the sake of getting things rolling. Apparently, this was something that was said against President Erdogan when he was the mayor of Istanbul. And it was said that he would give a lot of licenses, a building license afterwards, with to buildings that did not respect these norms. So the question now for me is, once in the Turkey part, because the Syrian part is totally different, but in the Turkish part, when they have buried the dead and when they have healed the wounded and cared for, they provided for the living, how is this going to enact politically? We have elections in 3 months in Turkey, and there is really a big question mark.
Elections scheduled for the month of May. And before we talk about the situation over the border in Syria, again, it's right now, as you were saying, still about digging through the rubble, but it's also about relief for the survivors. Yes. France 24's team in Gaziantep spoke Thursday with some displaced who were quite vocal.
Before we got this tent, we spent 2 nights in the park. There was only 1 mattress and a blanket for the whole family. So for us, this is like a 5-star hotel.
You're only giving blankets to people in tents. So what about those of us sleeping in our cars?
Yesterday, we came here and registered. I waited 3 hours. Then they sent us to another park. We're being sent backwards and forwards. I'm at a loss for what to do. We are hungry. We are hungry.
Turkey's president acknowledging hiccups at the start of the rescue and relief effort. And also, Ana Navarro-Pedro was mentioning its campaign time, a 10,000 lira handout, the equivalent of $530 to each family affected by the quake.
We will provide our citizens who do not want to stay in tents with houses by paying their rents.
So Nur Ibrahim, stipend plus rent, and we're told that stipend might go up, and the figure might go up from 10,000 lira.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Well, just a question about what President Erdogan's answer has been.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's panicking, but I think before we talk about the politics of the situation, it's important to focus on the fact that there's a lot of concern right now that this earthquake is just not going to stay relevant in the news cycle for a very long time. Will the Western world still care about this in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months? And as we discussed, I think that this is a situation that the recovery for both countries is going to take a very, very long time, and it's going to require all the international aid and global attention that it can get. So I just feel like that's an important point to emphasize before we go into, the politics of the situation. Of course, he's panicking. Of course, he's making an attempt right now that's really nothing more than a Band-Aid on a situation that is likely going to not fare very well for him, for his political life. And yeah, I just think the focus right now should be on just emphasizing the sheer scale, the sheer scope of the destruction and the damage that's happened right now, and keeping that in the news cycle, keeping that top of mind, because really this is just the beginning of what's going to be a pretty bad few years for both of these countries.
A pretty bad few years.
Absolutely. But, I would just say, to amend what Noor is saying, is that you can't, really separate the politics from the aid delivery effort in both Syria and Turkey. You have a situation in Turkey where you have a government agency, AFAD, that is so centralized and insisting that all aid be delivered through it. We had video earlier showing people volunteering to go and help out on their own initiative. The AFAD, the main disaster relief agency, has warned against that, insisted that aid be delivered through the central government constantly. This is just not the way to do things, according to aid officials that I've spoken to in Turkey. And this has been a hamper toward getting aid to the people who need it on a local level and on a community level. In Syria, you have a situation where there's a lot of people who want to help. There's a lot of people around the world who want to help internationally. But you have a situation where you have an isolated enclave under the control of rebels that are not part of the Damascus government. And you have a regime in Damascus that is instrumentalizing aid, has a history of instrumentalizing aid, of punishing people and politicizing aid, that has been very reluctant to let aid get across from Damascus and Aleppo to the rebel areas. And you have a Russian patron of that regime that has repeatedly hampered efforts to get aid across the border from Turkey into this area.
Yeah, Syria, where it's desperate, 4 days.
And I'd like to clarify that.
Go ahead, Noor.
I just want to clarify that I was referring to the Erdogan situation. Of course, when it comes to Syria, the political situation there is going to absolutely play a huge role. And the fact that they're even blaming this on Western sanctions, when we all know that humanitarian aid is exempt from that. And just the fact that all of these countries don't trust what the Assad regime is saying in terms of allowing that aid to reach opposition-controlled areas. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah. Nor we had, it was this Friday that for the first time we saw Bashar al-Assad go to affected areas. He was in Aleppo, and when he was there, he, as you said, blasted the West for sanctions. Later, we had state media claiming that Damascus is going to allow international aid to travel into rebel-held areas. We've had no confirmation on that from the UN nor from the International Committee of the Red Cross. How does the UN handle this one at this point?
If he truly had the intention to do that, then there wouldn't just be one border crossing right now that would enable people to deliver aid to rebel-controlled areas. The fact is, that issue of just not having a way in is one of the biggest problems hampering aid delivery. And it is absolutely within his control to open up more crossings. They existed before, and they've all been shut down. And now they have to rely on one point of entry, which is just not enough, again, considering just the scale and scope of the destruction there.
Yeah, we're looking at that map of Bab-al-Hawa.
Then that's what they would do.
Yeah, we're looking at that map, and it's the only one of those four there that's open, Ana Navarro Pedro.
Yes, let's be very clear. Of course, Bashar al-Assad uses international aid as a political tool and as a blackmail tool as well. And of course, all the aid that in the past has arrived to the rebel areas going through Damascus, it has been, tiny little bit of what should have gotten there. The problem now is with the United Nations as well, with the international community, and that's before this tragedy. A group of lawmakers, jurists, of lawyers had addressed a letter to United Nations Juridic Service, which is run by a Portuguese lawyer, saying that, okay, we have this argument here that will allow for aid from United Nations to get to these areas in a more steady way and with meeting the real needs of the people. They are hoping now that this letter will allow the juridical service of United Nations to go ahead, but many people have died already before this aid will get there, if ever gets there. You know, just for this little point that it's open between Turkey and Syria. So many, there's a border, so many more, as our colleague from Daily Beast were saying, so many more could be open if they really wanted to. Only this point now, there was only one convoy so far, and it was not a convoy with heavy lifting material or the material really needed for this situation. It was previously planned before. So absolutely nothing has been getting to these people. Have you looked at the eyes of these people? Have you looked at the man with a shovel, or an axe pick, trying to take, big blocks of cement and stones? They are abandoned and they are alone from everywhere. And we, international community, are also faulty in this.
Yeah, Eric Randolph, Noor Ibrahim, concerned about this falling off the world's radar. Syria's civil war has fallen off the world's radar. We're reminded of it by seeing those white helmet civil defense volunteers who've been the heroes of rescue efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as we were watching that, how long it's been since we've had Syria as the central discussion point of the media, and how it takes something of this devastating magnitude for it to be put back onto our radars, because so much the Syria conflict now often feels as if it's in the past, but really it's the problems that exist in the north of the country have never been resolved, and Turkey has played a big part in making sure that those problems aren't resolved, and it's a tragedy that we have to see something like this for us to be reminded about just what a mess that part of the world still is.
In the other big story that we've been following here this week, he went to the U.S. in December to thank his main arms supplier. Ukraine's president chose London, Paris, and Brussels for his second trip abroad since Russia's invasion nearly 1 year ago. And in case the joint session of the British Parliament didn't get the hint, Volodymyr Zelensky offering an Air Force pilot helmet to the Speaker of the House of Commons. Later, after an audience at Buckingham Palace with the King, Zelensky meeting Ukrainian troops that are training at Lulworth Camp military base. That's in Dorset in southwest England. There, the UK Prime Minister talked of plans to train Air Force pilots for the day the West might send fighter jets. Of course, that day is probably a long way off. Anna Navarro-Pedro.
We don't know. We don't know. We don't know what is going on. We don't have enough information. If they are training pilots, I believe the training of a pilot, we don't know for which aircraft they are being trained. Haven't been told which type of aircraft. It's not going to be MiGs or a former Soviet Union type of fighting aircraft. So we don't know. We don't know what is going on. And the training lasts from 9 to 12 months. So are they expecting the war to go on for another year from now on? Are fighters going, aircraft fighter are going to be provided to Ukraine? Who is going to pilot them? Who is going to be at the commands? We don't know, but this is a cheesy story. It's not well told to any of us. We've seen no tanks, no heavy artillery for Ukraine, and then all of a sudden there was kind of a rush. I give 4, I give 12, I give 30.
Which the Ukrainians say is not enough.
Which Ukraine says is not enough. And I don't think Europeans are in their reaction to Ukraine regarding ammunition, regarding armament, regarding membership for the European Union. I don't think there is coordinated strategy with clear objectives. It seems more that one is trying to be more than the other one, being hyper than the other one. I honestly don't see any strategy. And there is one thing that I would like to say. We have seen many pictures of Zelensky with the European leaders laughing their heads off on pictures and on video. And I've had some French elderly gentlemen remember Second World War and telling me, could you imagine General de Gaulle, and of course this is an elderly person, Ben Winston Churchill, laughing that much, being so mundane during Second World War. and I can understand it. There is a catastrophic communications image here, and
you think it's catastrophic?
That laughing ahead with yes.
We've talked about this before. We are in a dire once in a lifetime war in Europe. And Western leaders are not preparing their people for this. We saw Macron do it a little bit, talking. They're not explaining to the public because of their domestic political fears, because they don't want to spook people. They're not telling them the real situation, and they're not explaining the stakes.
All right, let's talk about this. After London, Ukraine's president came to Paris. It was a three-way dinner with the leaders of France and Germany. His host dispelling or trying to the past perceptions that the French were hesitant about going all in.
My message first was full support from day one to the very last minute. My second message was to reiterate the fact that Russia cannot and will not win this war. And my third objective was to have a strategic discussion with him and Chancellor Scholz in order to precisely assess the objectives on the ground, the requirements and the needs from an operational and military point of view, and the strategy to negotiate future peace.
I mean, just the tone of that is not commensurate with the fact that there is a major war that is somewhere between World War I and World War II taking place in the Eastern Europe right now, and that there's missiles.
So what should he have said?
He should get on the air, and all these leaders should get on the air and say that, tell us what is at stake here. Explain it like a lion, not like a technocrat. And just sort of show people what is at stake if Russia wins at this point. And stop, we had a discussion about tanks or no tanks. Now it's about fighter jets or no fighter jets. If you're going to win this war, this is really, if you want to win this war, and I'm not a pacifist, but I'm not a warmonger either. But if you're going to do it, this is really no time for half measures.
Eric Randolph?
Well, just today, I attended the press conference, and I would mess up her surname if I tried it, but she was the TV journalist from Russia who famously held up the No War placard live on air. And she made a daring escape last October, just before being sentenced probably to 10 years in prison, and managed to get out with the help of Reporters Without Borders, and she's now exiled in France. But the picture, and we all know it, but the picture that she painted of life in Russia and what it's like to try and be a dissident and try to protest, even minimally in Russia, is terrifying. That is a country that is at total war. It's a totalitarian state that is fully engaged in a war. Europe, on the other hand, would like to just continue living the life that they're still living. And, if we can also somehow help the Ukrainians to win their little battle, but not, muddy our shoes too much in the process, then that would be great. But, the difference in Russia, we always like to focus on how badly Russia is doing.
Russia's at war.
Yeah.
For Ukraine, it's an existential threat. The further you go from the battlefield, isn't it normal for citizens to be less involved?
Absolutely. And I don't know that there is, obviously it's not an easy question. And the problem we've got is that what we're witnessing is mission creep bit by bit, where Europe and the West and America are sort of testing the water, seeing what they can get away with, a few tanks here, then maybe we'll do a couple of planes perhaps, and it creeps along rather than, as my colleagues here have been saying, having a strategy in the first place.
Noor Ibrahim, is there the feeling of mission creep where you are? It is true that there have been red lines put forth by the Biden administration that have been pushed back in the past year.
Absolutely, and I think we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. At some point, even talk of tanks were completely off the table, and I think what we're seeing more and more is just a pattern of moving that line in the sand towards Ukraine and moving that in his favor. But I do want to touch on Zelensky's messaging, too. I think that's why his speech was so powerful, because it really emphasized the fact that sooner or later this could be your problem, too. This is not the underlying message being Putin might not stop at Ukraine. And I think we've seen that with all the threats recently against Poland, against Moldova. And I think that's the kind of messaging that is important to adopt right now, because it's a reality. And not all of those threats are empty. And I think if they take a lesson from him, it would be that, to just keep in mind that this isn't one war happening in one country that's far away, that the repercussions and the stakes here are really significant for the entire continent, really.
For the entire continent, and wherever he goes, politicians certainly, and this was something Anna was alluding to a moment ago, want to be in the picture with Zelensky. They clapped for Ukraine's president at the outset of Thursday's EU summit family photo. In fact, you could see all of them clapping except one, and that is Hungary's Viktor Orban. He stood still. Earlier, Zelensky talking up, as Noor was saying, those shared European values in a speech before the EU Parliament.
We're defending from the anti-European, the most anti-European force of the modern world. We are defending ourselves, we Ukrainians, on the battlefield together with you.
So, Anna Navarro-Pedro, the messaging, is it off on the part of Volodymyr Zelensky?
No, I mean, his Minister for Defense actually said before, I think he's off now from some corruption scandal, but he said before that Ukraine is fighting a proxy war for NATO. And so NATO should give them the means of fight that war. So no, he's not off in his speech, and he's doing his job. He's defending his country with all means at his disposal. He's a good communicator. So no way. It's us Europeans that are not tuned to one strategy, to one vision, to the notion, and to explaining, as you said, to the peoples of the European Union, the geopolitical implications of this war and this situation, and we are not. Definitely not defending ourselves and our independence, unfortunately.
And I'm haunted by something Eric Randolph said about the mindset right now inside of Russia. By contrast, the fighting is relentless. So is the information war. One YouTube channel called That's How It Really Is Now, hailing Moscow's gifting of fur coats to widows and mothers of soldiers fallen in Donetsk, concludes with the man exclaiming, "That's how you see we're a real family." The Daily Beast's Alison Quinn reports how the 13 widows are shown obediently holding up their new fur coats for the camera as they all gush over the, quote, unexpected gifts, Noor Ibrahim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really surprised at just how ridiculous these Russian propaganda stunts are. But what I do find a little shocking is how insulting they are. Yes. I mean, it's really mind-boggling that it suggests that they take their own people for fools. And I think for that reason, what we're seeing is a lot more Russians kind of seeing through that and taking it a step further, like those widows did, and basically blasting them and telling the truth about what's happening. So,
because they had their fur coats taken away.
That's the most shocking part to me, is that, yeah, and like these stunts almost always backfire. So I'm really not sure what the goal is here, and I think it's quite insulting to attempt this to with your own people.
All right, Washington has its eye on Russia. It also has its eye on China. The Pentagon announcing that the surveillance balloon first spotted last week over Montana and shot down off South Carolina is just the tip of the iceberg, part of a global operation, says the Pentagon, targeting 40 countries. This story has, pardon the pun, Borzo Dargahi, ballooned. And other countries are now reporting spotting these balloons. It's just the standard fare, I spy, you spy.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think this is a huge thing. I think this is what governments do. I'm sure I'm sure the U.S., I'm sure France, I'm sure, well, maybe not the U.K. anymore, sadly, because of the collapse of the the UK economy and grand mission. But yeah, I'm sure that any country worth its salt with a intelligence program is trying to do this. I think the larger issue is just the explosion, really, if I can use your pun again, the explosion of the China-U.S. ties, the fact that there are no guardrails, as there were during, the Cold War between Russia and the United States. There was arms control treaties. There was, this sort of regular system of détente in the later years of the Cold War.
Isn't trade though the guardrail? I mean, the U.S. did virtually no trade with the Soviet Union.
I think that remains to be seen, and I think there is a sort of unraveling, an attempt to unravel on the part of the United States, at least, itself from Chinese supply chain networks and so on. So I think, and there's, after COVID especially, there's an understanding that, look, you take China, you take COVID, you take Russia, and you put that together, and what do you get? Basically, the post-1945 order that we had is gone. This is what politicians need to be explaining to the people.
Exactly.
That the safe European home, to quote The Clash, that you think you have is no longer a reality. The world has changed. We have to get on maybe not a war footing, but we are in a different situation on a different planet with different global security needs. Add climate change to that, and the situation becomes even more dire. Instead, you have like Macron with like his little, technocratic speak. Yes, this is what we're doing here. We're doing this. We're also trying to,
he's not the worst.
He's not the worst, yes. Schultz is probably the worst. We're trying to also deal with the retirement thing in the same tone, talking about these domestic and global issues. Who is he trying to reassure? Investors, French people? I think that sometimes, a little bit of alarm is not a bad thing.
All right, a volatile world, a bipartisan resolution condemning Chinese spying. It passed the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously, 419 to none. Unanimity. It's something that's in short supply, it seems, in the lower chamber of the U.S. Congress. It wasn't what sprang to mind when you watched the same chamber, now controlled by Republicans, host Joe Biden's State of the Union address on Tuesday.
Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion.
All right, and then we heard in that clip, Eric Randolph, cries of liar, the long-form version of BS. Speaking as a citizen of that nation of high entertainment parliamentary procedure, is it worse what we saw during that State of the Union address than what you find in the Commons?
Yeah, I'd say there's more of a kind of braying sound that you get in the UK Parliament that they haven't quite perfected in America yet. It's we've had many centuries of just devolving it down into.
What about the explicatives
noise? Yeah, I don't know if they go in for the. Yeah, I mean maybe they descend into that sometimes. It was nice to see Joe Biden actually look like he was enjoying himself. Actually, there was a bit of fun there. But then that's when you get into that's where the UK Parliament is at its grossest, when you realise what a good time they're all having. They probably had a couple of beers just beforehand, and it just becomes this big spectator sport. And I don't know. I mean, it's just a little bit unseemly after a while, isn't
it? Do you agree with that, Noor Ibrahim? It's been picked up upon the fact that Biden sort of enjoyed the goading. Is the new normal something to be wary of, but not for the reasons we might think?
I would actually take it a step farther and say that he was betting on certain members of the audience heckling him. I think that especially for Biden, because a lot of the attacks on him from the Republican side are, framing him as feeble and old and weak. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was a very calculated decision on his part, because he knows people love to see that. And I think for that reason, that was the most celebrated aspect of his speech for a lot of people, is that, you know, he snapped back, and it's not so often that that you see a president do that, and I think
is it a
this
problem?
is definitely a little victory for him.
Nor is it a problem that Congresswoman from Georgia yelling liar?
It's absolutely a problem, but it's very much representative of the state of U.S. politics nowadays and how it's really been since the Trump administration. So again, not surprising that they were heckled, and I think that he was almost betting on the fact that that would happen. It's not a good thing by any means, but it's just the way it is.
All right, Borzo, you were warning us about volatility in this new world that we live in.
No, but I mean, this is somewhat of a different issue. But I guess it goes to that kind of increase in new and disruptive processes. But, you know, just in general, it's different when, you know, the members of Congress debate an issue and they're in a kind of debate mode. The State of the Union address has traditionally had a certain element of decorum. It's the president talking about how the country is doing. And then the opposition has a chance to respond with their with an address that same evening, you know, with the televised address. And it turned into a free-for-all. And this is supposed to be a kind of a somewhat not solemn occasion, but a kind of an occasion with decorum. And there's opportunity if you want to yell at the president or yell at each other on a policy issue, if you want to even get down in the, you know, the grit of it, like in the House of Commons, they can do that. But perhaps it's a sad commentary that it happens during the State of the Union.
Perhaps that's one of the differences, right, Anavar Pedro, is that in the U.S. they have a president, whereas in the U.K. it's the prime minister who's in the pit.
Yeah, but remember, there is an iconic image, video of Margaret Thatcher leaving power because she was deposed, and she's fighting it off in Parliament. And at one point she goes, "Oh boy, am I enjoying this?" And she was enjoying the fighting. And no, I totally share your joy of having seen the President of the United States, of the superpower, that seemed to be I can't say the word, but seemed to have a cognition of what he was doing, and being
conscious.
Yes. Conscious, if cognizant, you want, cognizant. Thank you very much. I'm a foreigner. It's not my first language. But the thing that beyond the little incident, the interesting part was that, as you said, at this point where the old international order is dying and the new order is going to be fought at gunpoint, for sure, the interesting thing was to see that President Biden didn't talk about foreign policy almost in the end, just like, oh, and by the way, but he didn't talk about foreign policy, about the wars, about what's going on in the world and the position of the United States in this new world to come. So that was interesting. The Americans are not interested, probably.
So I mean, it's also a sign that we live in an era when politics is entertainment business. I mean, this is the long shadow that Trump has cast over.
He was good for business.
He was good for ratings.
Media business.
Yeah, he was good for ratings. He was good, you know, and that's, we're continuing to watch the wrestling match that you know already existed, but that he took up to the next level. And actually, the Chinese balloon thing fits very well into this as well, because what's interesting about the Chinese balloon is not that one country is spying on another, because we know that, you know, we have leaks that show that America was even spying on its allies many times. It does it routinely. But the fact that it was a balloon was what all fascinated us, because it was this sort of hilariously low-tech thing when we're supposed to be living in an era of, you know, microchips and satellites that can read your newspaper, and they're still just floating a balloon over Seattle. It was
hiding in plain sight. You're the culture editor, right?
Yes.
You are the culture editor.
That's right.
Okay, well, we have a question. Is the land of 35,000 boulangeries ready? U.S. donut maker Krispy Kreme, cream spelled with a K, is coming along with its wide array of multicolored offerings to this country. After hamburger chain Wendy's, 2023 will be the year that the latest in fine American cuisine will be taking on France, the nation that's home to Europe's largest number of McDonald's restaurants. So France, Michelin Guide 3-star restaurants, but also fast food. Eric Randolph, explain.
Oh dear, oh dear. I mean, I think this is, you know, if they manage to sort out their pensions strikes, they've got another reason to go out onto the streets over this. This is absolute blasphemy. Surely donuts can't catch on. We have pain au chocolat and we have pain raisin and we have those little almond ones of the thing, the eclairs. I mean, this is, you know, this is terrifying. But amazingly, yeah, McDonald's and all those fast food joints doing incredibly well in France, so apparently there is a market for it, but it just seems, you know, I think maybe with our romantic ideas of France being destroyed before our eyes.
What does this tell you, Borzu Dargan?
I mean,
we don't know yet if it's going to be a success.
Maybe they could start selling a croissant with a K, you know, at the Krispy Kreme. But look, you know, I mean, I heard the same thing. Oh, how can you even imagine that, you know, I've heard people saying this on social media, there's no chance that Krispy Kreme donuts will catch on in the land of the croissant and pain chocolat. I remember when Starbucks...
Have you darkened the door of a Krispy Kreme?
Maybe in my youth, my lost youth, yes. You know, I remember the same things were being said, though, about Starbucks when it came to France. Oh, we have our coffee culture, and, you know, it's never going to be changed, and les Américains, they're not going to be able to, you know, invade. And, you know, look at Starbucks' success in...
Yeah, but it caters to tourists.
I'm not so sure about that, because it also has changed the dynamic of, like, the little boulangerie are now serving paper cups that you can, you know, take to the subway. That wasn't true 15 years ago, that you could do that, and so it's actually changed the culture more than you can imagine. So I think that, you know, Krispy Kreme with some clever marketing could probably break into France.
Noor Ibrahim, is this a good sign? And is Tim Hortons next? Or is this rather just a further indication that the apocalypse is soon upon us?
I happen to think every country can benefit from a Tim Hortons. I mean, I think maybe their croissants won't be up to par, but they can always do what McDonald's did and, you know, add more items that are more appealing to the French palate, like the McBaguette, I think is what it's called. And that's been really popular there. So, yeah, I'm all for it.
I wish you were in the studio with us, because we're seeing those images of donuts that are, I don't know what flavor they are, but I can tell you the color. They're sort of a pastel green and raspberry sort of pink. What's your religion when it comes to Krispy Kreme, Noor?
I think for us, it's like a real good childhood treat, and it was something that I think a lot of people associate with just like good nostalgic memories. And look, not every Krispy Kreme has to, you know, put out the same products and the same donuts. So maybe they should phase it in with, like, you know, just simpler, classier donuts to start before they go all in. That would be my suggestion there, I guess.
Anna, are we being terrible snobs? Because that's what Noor seems to be implying.
No, by no means. That oversweet, too sweet, fried, munchy thing with toxic colors. I mean, there will be a market for it here. You know the song, if you can make it in New York, make it anywhere. If they can make it in Paris, they can make it anywhere. So why not? But I mean... sad.
They even have Domino's Pizza in Italy, our producer Alessandro Zinos tells us. Eric Randolph, after recently watching the launch for the Michelin Guide, your thoughts? I mean, are we just in a bubble when we think of French food?
A little bit. I mean, I think when I first moved to Paris, I had a few terrible experiences in Parisian restaurants, and I was quite shocked. And then I realized, you know, they were resting on their laurels for a long time. But actually, French cuisine has gone through a real revolution in a way that it did in London, for instance, about 20 years ago. And you really have a bunch of new chefs coming in who are much more open to what's going on around the world. And you actually have really good cuisine, really interesting stuff being done. And who knows, maybe there's space on the menu for a little Krispy Kreme finisher on some to make it into a mission. Probably not. Probably not. No, maybe not.
Nice
yeah.
Spelled with a K. Many
croissant with a K.
Croissant with a K. We'll work on that marketing concept. I want to thank you, Eric Randolph. I want to thank Anna Navarro, Pedro Borzu Daragahi, Noor Ibrahim in New York City. Thank you for being with us here In the world this week,